So good morning, everybody. I'm David Deutscher. I'm Chair for Committee for Ballarat. As you can see, I'm sitting here with Michael Polton, who's CEO. So we welcome you to our Action Plan Beyond 2020 and our special guest, Malcolm Turnbull. We begin with acknowledgement of country. So in recognition of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's spiritual and cultural connection to country, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Wadawurrung people from the Kulin Nation, traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waterways on which we are privileged to meet. We thank them for their continued custodianship. We acknowledge and celebrate the continuation of a living culture that has a unique role in this region. We acknowledge elders past and present, and we thank them for their wisdom, guidance as we walk in their footsteps. So we have some special guests today. We'd like to welcome our Mayor, Councillor Ben Taylor, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Belinda Coates, our sitting councillors, Sam McIntosh and Grant Tillett. And we also welcome our Golden Plains Mayor, Owen Sharkey, and we are pleased to have our local MP, Juliana Addison. And as well, we're pleased to welcome Beyond Zero's Admission Chair and CEO, Aitan Lenko. And of course, we're delighted to have our former Prime Minister, 29th in fact, the Honourable Malcolm Turnbull. So over the few years, Mr. Turnbull has crossed my desktop several times. If we could forget in 1987, the young Aussie lawyer who took on the British legal establishment to allow the publication of the former M16 operative Peter Wright's Spycatcher. I guess it was a bit like winning the Ashes at Lord's, really. It seems that Mr. Turnbull has always been the bigger picture man, and what better example than his book on the Australian Republic published in 1987, and Mr. Turnbull was chair of the Australian Republican movement from 93 to 2000. And in today's context, Snowy 2 is another example of his bigger picture thinking. A big picture, of course, has attracted much commentary since its publication, but for me, perhaps one of the standout moments was when Mr. Turnbull showed the courage to spell out the psychological toll these events had on him. However, maybe fate has its moments in allowing you, Mr. Turnbull, to return to the issues of energy and climate change, issues someone once described as the biggest moral issue of our time. Indeed, Committee for Ballarat seeks the bigger picture for our regions, so we feel most privileged to welcome you to Ballarat to share with us your ideas, insights, and encouragement as we seek to further our own regional discussions on these critical topics around energy. We trust that another time you'll be able to visit us in person, not just zooming in and out. We have a few questions we'd like you to address, and we're lucky to have our own Hamish MacDonald, namely our CEO, Michael Polton, to pose some of these questions. But before Michael does, I have one question particularly for you, Mr. Turnbull, and can you tell us something of your journey to this topic of Beyond Zero emissions and how you define that term?
Well, it's actually Beyond Zero Emissions, the organisation that Aitan Lenko is the CEO of. I actually launched their first report, oddly enough, I think back in 2010, wasn't it, Aitan? And this has to be our ambition. It has to be our goal. I mean, we can't be merely mouthed about it. The world needs to drastically and urgently cut its greenhouse gas emissions. We really must get to net zero emissions as soon as we can. And a huge part of that is zero emission energy, zero emission electricity, in fact. The good news is that we actually now have the means to do that and have cheap electricity at the same time. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? I mean, when I was John Howard's Environment Minister back in 2007, renewables were much more expensive than generating electricity from burning coal. And so the question was, how do you pay for that? How do you pay for that differential? And the argument was, people were saying, well, we don't want to pay more for our electricity. And, the opposition to an emissions trading scheme was always built around economics or cost of living, really. This was the, you can remember Barnaby Joyce and Abbott, going out and complaining about a great big electricity tax and that sort of thing. Well, you know, technology has moved on. In the last decade alone, the cost per watt of photovoltaic modules has declined by over 90%. And the trend is continuing. I mean, there are new technologies, actually many of them developed in Australia, which are going to increase the efficiency of photovoltaics even more. The cost of wind per watt has come down too, not by as much, it's a more mature technology. And of course, the cost of storage, in particular battery storage, has been coming down rapidly too. So we have the means now of generating abundant, clean, green, zero emission electricity, a combination of renewables, which obviously you know, only operate, as they say, when the wind blows and the sun shines, but that's most of the time actually, one way or another. But nonetheless, you then have to store it. And that's why you mentioned, David, Snowy Hydro 2.0, the big pumped hydro scheme that's being built in the Snowy Mountains at the moment. You know, that's a very big example. I mean, but we'll need many times Snowy Hydro 2.0, although probably not any others as big as that, single ones as big as that. But all of that technology is very available, very doable, actually in terms of pumped hydro, very long established. I mean, it's been around for over a century. So, you know, there is now literally no economic reason not to move rapidly to zero emission energy. And we should be ambitious. We should look to going beyond zero emissions because we have the capacity to do that. I mean, we can go beyond zero emissions. We can turn Australia into not just a net zero emitter of greenhouse gases, but a continent that absorbs more greenhouse gases, more CO2 than it emits in net terms. And you know, all of that is now feasible. So, you know, what had been a big cost, but a cost worth paying, I might add. So, you know, we've only got the safety of the planet at stake. But if we've gone from having a big cost in front of us to an opportunity to have cheaper and zero emission electricity. So the opposition is really a combination of inertia, vested interests, and frankly, crazy populist politics. You know, it's one of the great disappointments that in Australia and also in the United States, but really not much anywhere else, the global warming and the need to respond to it has become an issue of value or identity, as opposed to being a question of physics. You know, and as you would have heard me say many times when I was in office, you know, we've got to deal with this issue with engineering and economics, not ideology and idiocy. So I'm glad, want to congratulate you all for the leadership you're showing and bringing engineering and economics to bear for a greener, safer and cheaper energy future for Ballarat.
Mr. Turnbull, thank you for that answer. That's a great way or great place for us to start. And I think you've spoken there of the economics. You've spoken of the engineering, the technical issues, and it's fantastic to hear that optimism. Can you talk to us a little bit about perhaps some of the social importance here as well? And I see some impacts or some studies overnight again coming out of the Reserve Bank, where we're facing unprecedented times, as we all know. Can you also talk to us about sort of some of the social benefits that we're talking about here and how that might impact us in a way of being able to move to this transitional position much more quickly than we might be at the moment?
Well, you know, what could be more important than ensuring that our planet is safe for our children and grandchildren to inherit? You know, it is, you know, Kevin Rudd described it as the greatest moral challenge of our times. I don't think Kevin was the first person to describe it as that, but it's a very fair point because it does involve our generation making decisions and making investments to benefit future generations. And, you know, but to be honest, when Kevin said that, it was a different time, because then the real issue was people were saying, why should we in our generation bear these big costs to offset, you know, risks that are way off into the future? Well, the reality is the costs are not nearly as great, number one. And number two, the risks are not that far off. You've only got to look at the last bushfires. You know, I was going to say last summer's bushfires, except they started in early spring. You know, the reality of global warming and the consequences thereof are with us now. So yeah, but I think also, you know, frankly, for regional, you know, the opportunities, the employment opportunities in regional Australia from renewables are just enormous, because you go from having an electricity system which is dominated by a relatively small number of big spinning machines, you know, powered by steam, you know, generated from burning coal for the most part, to having a much more distributed network of solar farms and wind farms around the country. You know, you've got the big opportunities, industrial opportunities of making green hydrogen and so forth. But the good thing is it's spread out, and so it is not centralised, and that, you know, that has implications for the grid, but it also has a lot of benefits in terms of resilience. So yeah, I think it's honestly, I cannot see any negative associated with moving now. I mean, before you could legitimately say, I do not want to pay more for my electricity. You could say, you know, but someone could say that. And then the argument was, well, it's worth paying it because you're going to save the planet. Fair enough. Now, this is, I mean, the failure to have an integrated climate and energy policy federally, which is only because of crazy politics in the Liberal Party, frankly, that failure means that we have higher emissions and higher electricity prices. How mad is that? I mean, how mad can you get? You know, you could say, oh, well, yeah, I'm happy to have higher emissions because my electricity is cheaper, but we've got higher emissions and higher prices. That's how stupid it is.
So, Mr. Turnbull, can you give us, do you have any insights for us into how, from a local perspective or regional perspective, we might be able to impact on change in that regard? We've got business who is leading the way in all sorts of, particularly in our region here, we've got many businesses who are investing their own money in green technologies and certainly renewable energy as a part of that, updating plants and so forth. Is there any insights you've got for us in relation to politically how our voices can be heard more strongly to impact change at the federal level? Because policy does need to change.
Well, ultimately, the only thing that will make politicians sit up and take notice is the risk of losing their seats or losing government, right? Or winning government, that's the incentive. So it's got to be translated into real action on the ground, and that is, you know, there's just honestly, you know, a lot of people theorise and commentate on politics, and you know, there's that great old cynical old saying once, I think it was originally in Washington, they said, those that know aren't talking and those that are talking don't know. And a lot of the people that comment on politics don't know, you know, don't understand. It is actually much simpler than you think. It is fundamentally, politicians are focused on winning power and holding it. And so they've got to feel there is an electoral consequence for this, because, you know, regrettably, there are not enough people in politics that are actually motivated by good policy. Politics is increasingly full of political professionals who are interested, you know, who basically are interested in, as I said, you know, winning power and for its own sake. I mean, I'm being very blunt with this, a bit brutal, I know some of you might find this, but it's true. So you've got to be able to deliver electoral consequences. And of course, you know, that means changing people's minds, right? So that means if you can demonstrate in your region what a green agenda will deliver in terms of, you know, better amenity, cheaper energy, and so forth, that will have a big impact.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to pause for a moment, and I will invite people through in the audience today through the chat. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask, we'll see how we go for time. But please use the chat function if you'd like to ask a question. Mr. Turnbull, can I go? And again, it is an action. Can I go to the Million Jobs Plan? I know you're an advocate for BZE's work in this space, and I know that there's some launches coming up, so I won't ask you to steal their thunder too much. But you did talk about the action that is happening on the ground, how you can deliver these things, what are some of the initiatives that can occur. I guess if I was to look at the Million Jobs Plan, great ambition and fantastic to be able to connect that sense of here are some good outcomes from policy shift and real action. Could you perhaps talk to us about some of the things that you see in that plan that you're particularly excited about, and what might be of real benefit for a regional area like our own?
Well, again, I mean, ATAN is Lenko, who is, I suppose, the principal author of the plan, is on the call. We could maybe call on him to go into more detail, but the key elements are, firstly, you've got a lot of investment, right, in new transmission, new generation, new storage. All of that creates jobs and opportunities, but the outcome is cheaper electricity. Let me make a point about the economics of renewables, which is often overlooked. When you see discussions of the cost of renewables, and you'll often see a term LCOE, the long-term cost of electricity, it's important to remember that is basically a banker's calculation, because that is derived from the financial cost. So if each of us have solar farms, 100 megawatt solar farms, and mine costs twice as much to build as yours, I will have a higher LCOE than you, naturally, because I've got more capital I've got to service. But the one thing we have in common is that we are both zero marginal cost generators. So once it's built, whether it's a wind farm or a solar farm, because they're the operating costs are very low, and there are no marginal costs. So, you know, if it's a very cloudy day, I'm generating less energy. If it's a very sunny day, I'm generating more energy. It didn't cost me any more to operate on the sunny day than on the cloudy day. And so what that means is that renewables are bidding in, they will take whatever price is available. And that means you're going to have, and you're seeing this already, at different times of the day, large excess supply of electricity. And of course, this is where storage comes in. So you see, what Snowy Hydro will do is they will buy electricity at very low prices, and the people who sell it to them will be happy to take it, by the way, because the alternative is maybe not selling it at all. And they'll just pump the water up the hill and then, you know, generate the electricity by running it down the hill. Exactly the similar equation will arrive in due course. Technology is not as advanced, obviously, with making hydrogen through electrolysis. So the opportunity we've got here is for much cheaper electricity. And again, you know, I'm not an engineer, right? I've been an investor in, and, you know, I'm an amateur. I'm what my late father would have called an enthusiastic amateur when it comes to technology. But in some areas of technology, you get the opportunity for really considerable advances. In mature areas, you know, the advances might be 1% a year, or, you know, 0.5% a year. And, you know, over time, of course, that adds up. But with photovoltaics, there is so far to go. And so the trend is extraordinarily good. And so we're going to see cheaper and cheaper energy from the sun. And what that's going to mean is ultimately cheaper and more abundant electricity. And it's going to be distributed. And so that means that there are enormous opportunities everywhere, and you can create microgrids. You could create a microgrid in your own area. You've obviously got issues with the NEM and, you know, the state government, electricity regulation and so forth. But you can create, you know, areas of absolute sort of self-reliance, which, you know, would have been, you know, sort of almost inconceivable in years past. I mean, I'll give you an example that, you know, there's, you know, one of the problems with centralized generation is obviously that you've got to build all these poles and wires and haul those electrons all over the countryside. If you can create greater independence and reliance, you can save a huge amount on transmission and distribution. And so you know, you're seeing that now in some of the areas that have been affected by bushfires, where the, you know, electricity lines have been destroyed. Sort of the utilities are providing people with solar panels, a battery and a generator, you know, if all else fails, and setting them up. Now that's being done on a sort of temporary basis, but that can be a longer term solution for a community writ large. I mean, I'll give you a good example. If you think of the Spencer Gulf in South Australia, and just think of the western side of the Spencer Gulf, where you've got Port Lincoln and so forth, you've got phenomenal wind resources there, phenomenal solar resources there, and also pumped hydro opportunities. So you can imagine if you're a tuna fisherman in Port Lincoln and you're sick of paying a fortune for electricity, you're saying to yourself, maybe we should be more self-reliant here. So it's just the only constraint is your imagination. The technology is there. We've got tons of technology now. It's cheap, it's getting cheaper. The challenge is working out, imagining what to do with it.
Mr. Turnbull, that's a great answer. Thank you for that, because the second half of our presentation today, we will touch on that as an ambition and the potential for our region to essentially be a very large microgrid, of about 120,000 people. And when you think that we've got an incredible density of wind generation on our doorstep, there's a different way of doing things. So thank you for that, and we'll certainly explore that a bit further. Look, we are running out of time with you. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to pull together a couple of questions that we've got that are on a similar theme. And in relation to your thoughts or your commentary around the federal government's latest roadmap for technology, or the technology roadmap, and how you think that might help to create this earlier transition, or this transition to a carbon neutral economy.
Well, I think the roadmap's fine. It's I don't have a problem with the roadmap, other than that it doesn't have a destination. You know, it runs through a lot of the technologies and summarizes the status of research and development in them. But what it lacks, and this is because of the political problems within the coalition, what it lacks is a destination, which should be, you know, a very substantial reduction in emissions in the near term, and net zero emissions by a date. I mean, 2050 is the one that people throw around. I think we could aim to do that sooner. You know, frankly, again, you know, you've got no idea how unable many people in government are to recognise the pace of change. You know, it's one of the fundamental problems that you have. And you know, there are people that are still thinking about the economics of energy as though the numbers were the same as they were a decade ago, and they're not. You know, you've got to basically, you know, it'd be like going onto the ASX and buying shares on the basis of research that was 10 years old. You know, half the companies you'd be thinking of buying wouldn't even be listed anymore. So you've got to keep up to date all the time. And, you know, as I said, everything is working in your favor to achieve precisely what you're talking about. A microgrid is not the right term. We need something, a sort of a MIDI grid or something.
A cooperative energy network.
Perfect. There you go. You've got it.
Mr. Turnbull, there is another question online, and it does come back to our comment before about the nexus between federal policy and public action. And I suspect the answer to that is, as you've said, is this capacity for us to continue to try and work locally and to continue to put pressure on our local politicians in a view of hoping to bring about that policy change. Is that the answer?
Yeah, I think it. Yes. The answer is yes. I mean, I'm not a commentator. I'm not a theorist. I've been a practitioner in politics for quite a while. And I can tell you the only thing that will really focus people's attention is the risk of losing office or the allure of gaining office. And, that's and I regret to say the focus on good policy is harder. You see, the more people you have in politics who are political professionals, who have done nothing but politics their whole life, the more they view everything through that prism. So it's not just, following the Jack Lang dictum, and the great race of life always back self-interest because it's trying. That's a pretty good argument, but I tell you the politics, the numbers that are of most concern are the electoral numbers. So just you've got to really sit down and say, how are we going to focus on that in our community? And that's, you've basically got to put heat on your local representatives if they're not doing the right thing.
Mr. Turnbull, we thank you very much for your time and insights, the enthusiasm for this enterprise, the recognising that we're in a different period of history where this is really a tipping point for opportunity for a low cost for energy and for decentralising and people power in one sense. Also for the political insights that perhaps inform some of our action, both as committee and for our local politicians. So you'll no doubt have generated a lot of discussion amongst our members as we go forward, and we look forward to perhaps interacting with you again in the future.
Look forward to it. Thank you for inviting me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, thank you very much for your contributions there through the chat, and apologies we perhaps weren't able to get to all of them specifically. I did mention to Mr. Turnbull there throughout our conversation, and he mentioned Hon Lenko, who is the chair and CEO of Beyond Zero Emissions. You'll see in the chat bar that Heidi Lee from Zero Emissions has invited us to the launch of what is the 1 million jobs plan, which is actually on Monday next week. So I would invite you to have a look at that. And if you do have some interest in this area, the work that BZE has done is enormous. They've got some fantastic partners on site, and they're looking to do some further partnership work. And potentially our region is an area that they might have some interest in. So we look forward to partnering with both Hon and Heidi over the course of the next little while. But I would like to move forward today, and we are in a position where committee is continuing to try and work with its members to look at what its projects are for 2020 and beyond. And it's that time of membership year. So thank you very much for your support, and I look forward we look forward to your further support as committee continues to do its business. I did want to share with you our vision for that future, and in terms of our priorities and our projects that the board and our project teams are working towards. The connection to renewable energy via the sustainability and livability agenda is crucial. And I hope today to be able to at least bring that to your attention. We will have some time in chat groups, and I am really keen to get members talking to each other, both in reaction to Mr. Turnbull's comments today and also to our own agenda. So we'll move to chat groups in about 10 minutes. But I'm going to share a screen with you, or share my screen with you, and just take you through the presentation of our work over the course of the next little while, and with a particular lens, as I say, on the renewable energy piece of that. Committee for Ballarat has always had a long-term focus. And I think one of the things that we need to continue to work towards is this view that we're moving beyond electoral cycles. With that in mind, and I'm not quite being able to move my slide, here we go. With that in mind, I just wanted to share this graph with you. And it's interesting if we think about it from a long-term perspective. And I think as consumers, as the populace, we get used to a level of performance. We turn our lights, we go to the light switch, we turn it on, the light switch comes on. We expect that performance. Over time, we see incremental innovation. We see dimmer switches coming into it. We see now LED lights that are available to us. So we kick the can down the road with a little bit more innovation here and there as we go along. And I think one of the things that committee is interested in is saying, how do we create this disruptive change that actually brings about an enormous shift in the way we do things? What's the long-term shifts that we need to be looking towards now, planning for now, such that the future can be a very different place for us? And energy fits nicely into this. I think an example, and I've used this with some of you, is electric vehicles. And if we think about that yellow line, that our motor car companies have continued to improve the combustion engine. They've continued to improve the delivery of a motor car. New models, more technology, better fuel efficiency, a whole range of incremental innovations have come along. And then the electric vehicle comes along, and it's the disruptor. It is totally different. It is an innovation in such a way that takes motor cars into the next generation. So it's an example of this sense of disruptive innovation. And our thoughts through committee is, how do we do this through energy, and how do we do this through energy in our regional, local environments, that centralised generation that Malcolm spoke about. But more broadly, the work that we do has population growth at its absolute core. It is the #1 issue that our members have spoken to us about now for a couple of years, the concerns of population growth. It's inevitable. Ballarat is growing, and we will have seen anecdotally over the course of the last little while, particularly stories around the changing nature of work in metropolitan cities, that the potential for population growth to grow in regional cities is even more significant. That brings with it a cost to livability, or potentially a cost to livability. We live in regional areas because we can live a particular lifestyle, and we don't want to compromise that. So this notion of sustainability then, how is it that we sustain the livable environment that we have in the face of a growing population? Beyond that, we look at connectivity. How do we connect a city, a region that is growing? How do we connect our region to major metropolitan centres, i.e. Melbourne? How do we connect our region to other regional cities, to Bendigo, to Geelong, to Ararat, to Mildura? There is a connectivity piece that is about region to region, but there's also a connectivity piece here that's about within our own region. How do we ensure that we have the transport options available to us, both from an active transport point of view and a shared transport point of view, our road network, and all the other areas that connect our city within our own city, within this growing population. Connectivity also, though, takes in terms of community connectedness. And I think that's another area that the committee will continue to have an interest in. Hence, leadership becomes extremely important. So the body of work that committee is embarking upon, or will continue to embark upon, in the face of population growth, how do we ensure we can maintain our livability? How is it sustainable? How can we connect to each other? And how can we lead the processes that bring those things about? So sitting outside of that diagram is health and education and jobs and training. And I think that all our work has to have this continued lens of how does it help the health and education of our community, and how does it improve the jobs and training opportunities for our community. I won't spend much time on this because there's more detail here than you need, and we will be providing this to our members in a much more digestible way. But if we look at population growth and livability, what does it mean in sustainability? We're looking at renewable energy as a critical part of that. We're looking at innovation and new enterprise as a critical part of that. And we're looking at housing, commercial and industrial developments as a critical part of that, particularly with the view of large rooftop solar. So in the sustainability agenda, those three areas are the ones that we're looking to explore. If we think about connectivity, we've been strong in this space for a long period of time, and we'll continue to work on the next generation of regional fast rail. and where the Melbourne Airport rail link fits within that context. The Western Rail Plan is critical to that connectivity. Intra-city connectivity, active transport, shared transport. The City of Ballarat have a wonderful integrated transport plan. How do we, as a committee and a community, help the City of Ballarat implement that over time? I've mentioned social connectedness, and clearly member engagement is a big part of that. And then finally to leadership. And Leadership Ballarat Western Region, LBWR, as many of you know it, has a strong community leadership focus and always has. It's been our flagship program and will continue in that space. But we also need to engage our alumni and our businesses much more directly in that and look for partnerships to expand our leadership offerings. I'm going to talk just a little bit more detail about the livability and sustainability model. So if we're thinking about a livable region, if we're thinking about a livable city that we need to be able to sustain in the face of population growth, sustainability needs to form the foundation of our decisions. And we need that because, as Malcolm said earlier, that we need to ensure the future is bright for our children and theirs. We need to have a positive impact on the health and well-being of our community. And we can do that through sustainable thinking and sustainable decision-making. Importantly, we see this as a way of being able to create a key differential for our region, economically, socially, and environmentally, and be able to attract new businesses, innovative businesses to town, because we do have a model that is a sustainable one, and sustainability underpins our decision making. And perhaps most importantly, it is in response to the challenges of climate change. So what's our ambition? In relation to renewable energy, in relation to sustainability, in relation to livability, the committee is looking to work with our partners, to work with our members, to work with our key stakeholders, and to work with our entire community on working towards a sustainable city that's carbon neutral, driven by 100% renewable energy. And I want to note the City of Ballarat work in this space, and they have a wonderful carbon neutrality plan. It's for the city's operations, and we believe that together and in partnership with our entire community, we can help deliver that ambition for the city and the region more generally. The Ballarat Prosperity Framework talks about Ballarat as a city of possibilities. Sustainability will include becoming a national leader in renewable energy. And I think that was one of the challenges put to us today by Mr. Turnbull. How do we bring that about? How do we make that happen? We are blessed in this region to have access to wonderful natural resources. How do we bring about this capacity to become a national leader in renewable energy? So how do you make it happen? Multi-stakeholders, whole of community partnerships. Together, we can work on making this happen. Together, we can draw investment, and the number of investment opportunities that are now out there for sustainable, long-term, new energy technologies is extraordinary. And we need to make the most of those things, and through partnerships, we can make it happen. And if we can pull those things together, then we will get innovative projects coming to town and be able to attract more jobs. So it's the combination of a whole of community approach with multi-stakeholders in partnership that brings about investment that will bring together innovation and jobs. And finally, our aims. What are we trying to achieve? Where are we heading? We're looking to maximise the opportunity for locally generated renewable energy. It's on our doorstep. How do we ensure that it comes into our businesses, into our homes, into our industries, before it heads off into the national energy grid? Maximising locally generated renewable energy. Clearly, we're interested in seeing the reduction of carbon emissions. We need to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And again, Mr. Turnbull has spoken well of that this morning. We're looking to develop a model that incorporates local generation, transmission, and distribution of renewable energy into our region. And you heard me say a Ballarat Energy Cooperative. If we look to our neighbours in the Hepburn Shire, Hepburn Wind essentially does that. Are we able to scale that for a population of 120,000, 200,000 people? What's the capacity to scale the model to ensure that we can make the most of local generation, transmission, and distribution? To do that, we need to partner. We need to partner with organisations to help build our social capital. We need to attract private and government investment. But I think, as we heard from Mr. Turnbull this morning, that we can't rely just on government investment here, and there are plenty of private opportunities for investment in this space when you do have this multi-stakeholder approach. And finally, explore new industries that will generate innovative and new jobs for our region. It is about generating new industries. It is about creating a differential in our environment that attracts new industries and new businesses to this region because of the cost of the locally available generated renewable energies. So to our audience online today, it's a brief snapshot of committee's work. We're excited by the opportunities and we're excited by the capacity to work with our partners right across our membership and beyond to deliver for our region something that's pretty special. I do invite us all now to break out into some breakout rooms, and there are 3 questions that I'm going to put to our hosts. Firstly, what are your overall impressions of what you've heard this morning? Are we on the right track? Secondly, what are the key opportunities, or what do you see as the key opportunities in what you've heard from both Mr. Turnbull and ourselves this morning? And finally, what questions do you have? Because I can assure you we do not have all the answers at this point in time. And the only way we're going to get the answers is by being able to work collaboratively and collectively with our membership and our broader community to bring them about. So I'm going to ask our tech support now to send us off into our breakout rooms. I'm going to give people 10 minutes. We are running a little short of time. I apologise for that. But 10 minutes of conversation in your breakout rooms, and we'll bring you back together again shortly. Thank you. We're welcome back. Thank you.
Bill?
There may have been a little problem in one of those rooms. So if you didn't find your host, as in the chairman, David Deutscher, I apologise for that. You're going to have someone fail on the technology. You really don't want it to be your chairman, but
Got lost in cyberspace somewhere.
Caught in the toilets at the moment, at the critical moment. Can I draw your attention, folks, to the chat bar? And Belinda Coates, Councillor Belinda Coates, our Deputy Mayor, has popped the link there to the City of Ballarat's Integrated Transport Action Plan. It is a public document out for public comment at the moment, and I would encourage all members to have a look at that and certainly have their say. And committee will certainly be formulating a response, and we've already had some conversations, but it is one that I would draw your attention to. I'm not going to go around all the rooms in detail. I'm conscious of our time, but I will go to a couple and just ask for your 1 or 2 real high-level highlights. And Liz Carruthers, if I go to you first, please, what came out of your room that was a particular highlight for you?
Yeah, it was around engaging with the pollies. What is that thing that's going to cut through? Probably to do with price for locals. And secondly, you know, it is, Malcolm, Mr. Turnbull's points, it is possible, you know, technically, cost-wise, it is possible to do stuff. We need to start and get concrete examples, pilots happening on the ground. Great,
thanks, Liz. Rod Walton, for your room, what came out of that, out of our 3 questions that caught your attention?
Actually, we had a very exciting room, Michael. It was wonderful. I had about 3 questions. We were coming up with answers already. So in regard to what our region can be looking to doing, we raised about going beyond wind and solar and looking at bioenergy. And in regard to our agricultural sector, how do we link into that? In regard to hydrogen, green hydrogen, we thought, well, at the overseas at the moment, they're looking at the trains that actually be run on hydrogen, then how we link in local manufacturing, a local capability like Ulster to actually, they could tap into this technology. So they were the thoughts that we're actually having there, when we could actually also link in the manufacturing sector. But then the key question coming back to is who will be the investors, and how do we actually ensure that they, you know, maybe whether it's local based but also Australian based investors into you know, what this opportunity is.
Great, thanks, Rod. And just on that last point, I had a fascinating conversation yesterday. Again, thank you for BZE for setting us up with this, with a Sustainable Australia Fund, and it's something that I am really interested in talking to some of our members about, particularly from a housing and an industry perspective with rooftop solar and full investment in those spaces. So more about that very soon. Paul O'Donoghue, can we go to your room? How was the conversation in your room, Paul?
It was good, Michael. I think we picked up on some of the themes that our friend Malcolm had, which was really around, this is simple, but it's being made complicated. And the issue around how eager is government is really something that's concerning people in the turnaround times, and just the sense of how, not necessarily local government, but certainly state and federal, how quickly will they come to the table, and how soon will they come to the table on whatever options are put in front of them. And there's already a couple out there that seem to be just sitting on people's desks somewhere. And I think the other really important one was that there is good opportunity for investment, or appears to be good opportunity for investment in the Ballarat region. So Ballarat is being talked about as a potential, and obviously we're in a competitive space, and you heard Malcolm talk about other parts of Australia. The conversation really was around there's jobs, and if it's about jobs, that's one of the things we really need to be putting in front of people as part of an investment strategy.
Yep. Thanks, Paul. And again, the Million Jobs plan that BZE will release has got some really interesting examples of where those jobs are. And if I think about our own region, retrofitting homes, looking at social housing opportunities, there's some real concrete examples in that space. And I know that, Paul, from Central Highlands Water perspective, you've got 4 solar plants, you've got an operation right now, and you're one of a number of our local businesses who are looking to invest their own dollars. And that collective effort, I think, is the thing that will really start to make some difference here. Bill Mundy, have we got you online, and have you got some thoughts you might like to raise with the group that you had, please?
Yes, certainly, certainly, Michael. And I think that the key thing that came out of our conversation was the necessity for folks to change the way they engage politically, and that there's an opportunity for us if we understand the political motivators. And to pick up the points that I think Liz made earlier around demonstrations, we've got to find opportunities to demonstrate projects, if you like, or waste to energy, whatever it happens to be, innovative approaches to effectively addressing the renewable energy challenge that we have within our region. And one example of that was pointed out to us in the sense that in our region, on one of the university's facilities in the Wimmera, we have more solar that we generate from the roofs of our buildings in the Wimmera than we need, and we are a net exporter of energy, which I know is a common opportunity for many businesses in our region to become a net exporter rather than a net user of the energy that they generate from their premises. And that we need help funding these opportunities. So the work that committee's doing, potentially through the Sustainable Industry Fund, whatever it happens to be, we need funding partners that can come to the fore to help us to be able to deliver innovative projects that are going to demonstrate our capacity to be able to move off the grid, be community generated energy as a part of, I think you termed it the Ballarat Cooperative Energy Generation Network, Michael. So that was probably the feedback. And the other thing was the mention of that there's a possibility of a $10 million research centre funding available for waste to energy, which is something that as a region we definitely need to capitalise on and take a first mover advantage on that as well.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And look, we are running out of time. I'm very quickly going to go to Claire Shaw. Claire, thank you for jumping in at late notice. From your room, was there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Michael. The main thing we were observing was that point about capturing the attention of federal politics and raising broader awareness of all the good things that are already happening. That seemed to be the key opportunity for us, and it's certainly been being a participant in the LBWR program this year. That's certainly given me a lot of insight that I've just sort of reflected on the fact there's a lot that I didn't know, and there's a lot that isn't known out there. So hopefully someone's got this as one of their applied leadership projects, but that does seem to be a real opportunity to raise that broader community awareness. And we do seem to be in a unique position as a region to do some really fantastic things.
Thanks, Claire. And to your LBWR 20 cohort who online, perhaps there's some ideas they might be able to get there. Talking of LBWR, Gary Trotter, can I throw to you, please?
Thanks, Michael. We had a small group of 2, but what sort of came out of that, I guess, was, and it's been touched on, where the political pressure points lie. As disheartening as it was to hear from someone who's been inside the tent for so long, Malcolm, that really, the next electoral cycle is what shapes a lot of thinking. I thought the point that was really interesting was around that a lot of politicians don't recognise the pace of change, and how we can actually educate them about how fast the world is moving. And if that's a collective mindset, it's both concerning, but at least it helps us to think we need to help them to understand how fast the world is changing. I think it was Jack Welch who once said, that if your organisation isn't changing at least equal to what's happening external, then your days are numbered. The question is just when. And so how do the politicians start to recognise and understand the pace of change? The point, like Bill mentioned, around examples, it was raised in our group. There was a 3-year payback on one of the installation projects. Within their institution, they have the ability to actually educate a whole range of children, our next generation coming through. So I think we can leverage in terms of multi-stakeholders. We can play all different roles, and one of those I was really pleased to hear was having, a very large cohort of children coming through that have been educated, and that institution actually saw themselves as a role model, and they had to lead by example. So how do all the multi-stakeholders, when we try and pull together, also see our role as role models and educators of others too, and how that ripples across our community?
Right, thanks, Gary. And it's interesting you talk of education, and clearly, the health and education perspective of committee is a critical one, and will continue to be so. And 5 schools who are members of committee, and we really hope to engage even further with the education network. And many of you will be aware of the Crazy Ideas College, which is doing the sorts of things that we're really talking about now. How do we find innovation in terms of it's coming out of our youth, and how can that path the way for our next generation? Finally, to Annie de Jong. Annie, you there? Have you got anything to add to the conversation?
Thanks so much, Michael. I hope that has worked in unmuting. Yeah, we had a group of 4, which was a great discussion. And I think what came out of the Turnbull talk was really around that it seems quite easy to do it now, and that we need to walk the walk. And that quite often there's an expectation that others will do it or others will lead, particularly directing it at government. So we were quite looking at the role of committee and the leadership, I suppose, segment, and that it needs some grassroots leadership. There was a feel that, people are a little bit fatigued. This issue has been around for a long time, and that there's perhaps some fatigue around information and some concrete examples that people can pick up and run with them themselves. We've talked about innovation, but I think some grassroots examples will help educate the community and give the message out that everybody can make a difference. And that came to the sort of fatigue around the information, and that it needs to sort of be regenerated into grassroots examples, and the leadership at the grassroots level will make quite a difference in our community, not just leaving it to government.
Great, thanks, Annie. And look, really appreciate your time this morning. I'm going to throw to David Deutscher just to finish up, and thanks to our hosts of those rooms who have given us that summary. So I appreciate your thoughts.
Well, I think this has been a very exciting morning for everybody, including those of Committee for Ballarat. And we thank those in the background, Adele and Mike and Gail and Michael, who've put a huge amount of effort into getting this up and running in this new era of Zooming. We haven't been Zoom bombed, so that's good. But I think, look, it's again been exciting to have Malcolm Turnbull, despite a little bit of scepticism there. But I think what I drew from him is the urgency, but also the opportunity that we never before. I mean, I suppose we've reached a tipping point where there's a degree of public awareness. There's an opportunity to create cheap, clean, green energy. Perhaps there's an acceptability, and Annie has pointed that perhaps there's a little bit of information fatigue, but on the other hand, clearly in the political sphere, there's an opportunity to to engage with our politicians in a collaborative way, not a combative way, and educate them and encourage them in those policy domains. So, but there's also power to the people in one sense of local projects, local cooperatives, local opportunities of innovation and demonstration of projects that can happen. And we've talked about Hepburn and some of the business projects that are already up and running. And as Rod's group pointed out, taking it beyond wind and solar. So much to think about. And I'm sure this is not the last time we'll have a meeting regarding this. And we'd be very keen, or Mike would be very keen to hear from you about any feedback or ideas of where we take this forward. And with connecting, I mean, Michael talked about connectedness, but connecting is also between those that have the intellectual and innovative ideas so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So in closure, thank you so much, everybody, for a very active contribution, a high-level discussion, and we look forward to communicating further in the space. And have a great day and a good weekend.
Thanks all. Bye now.